Fellow colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming so numerous today in early morning to share with us our concern on what is going on occupied Crimea. Last March, after the peak referendum, as you know, Russia attempted to annex Crimea, and in April last year, we had a first meeting in the United Nations on assessment of what was going on in Crimea. And I'm so proud to be a part of that presentation, and today organized by the Ukrainian American human rights organization, RAZOM. They will present their observations, which was distributed to all of you. I'm grateful that this time they are concentrated on the protection of the human rights in Crimea. Today in the morning, the Human Rights Monitoring Mission, authorized by the High Commissioner of Human Rights of the United Nations, presented their 11th report on the human rights situation in Ukraine. This monitoring group was initiated by our mission and supported by the Secretary General, and they did a great job during all these almost 2 years. In today's presentation, a serious part of this report is dedicated to violation of the human rights in Crimea. I advise you to find this report now that it has been published, and to find several very dangerous trends in the de facto authorities of Russia performing in Crimea. It's about the citizenship, where the monitoring mission recognized that under the law on the migration, so the Crimea residents, they are forced to accept on the Russian citizenship, and the Human Rights Mission defines that this is the violation of human rights, as really claims that people were dismissed or threatened to be dismissed from their posts for refusing to take up Russian Federation passports. This report also notes that the Crimean Tatars, including some of the Ukrainian ethnic origin, they were kidnapped. You'll find the comments of the Human Rights Mission on unfair trial processes organized by Russian authorities. Concretely, the report notes about the cases of Oleg Sentsov, Alexander Kolchenko, Askar Nabiev, and others. The mission notes that the process was marked by violations of fair trial standards and of presumption of innocence. Report raises the concern as to the violations of freedom of expression. You find a lot of other facts when the Ukrainian Crimean Tatars media were closed, and the journalists, they were sentenced or under the investigation. You'll find in this report the violation of the rights to use the native language. Crimean Tatars and Ukrainians, they found themselves in that very difficult situation. I also would like to attract your attention to the last law the State Duma of Russia Federation adopted on December 4th. Our ministry raised a serious concern. This law is about the empowerment of the Constitutional Court of Russian Federation not to take any actions to implement the decisions of the European Court on Human Rights. From now, millions of people who live in Russia and are seeking justice in Strasbourg court will be deprived of the opportunity to receive effective judicial protection against unlawful actions of the Russian authorities. This decision affects the interests not only of Russians, but the native from the third countries, stateless persons, migrants, refugees. Such a selective justice of Russia is another attempt to avoid responsibility for the serious and massive violations of human rights committed by Russian occupation authorities in Crimea. Using this opportunity to call upon the international community to give an adequate response to this negative trend. I wish our today's meeting to be successful. Don't want to take a lot of time, and proud to invite colleagues to share with you their concerns and their observations and their assessments on what is going on in Crimea. We are doing that in order to not only to share, but to consolidate the international solidarity to help us to protect our people, to protect other nationals in occupied and non-controlled by Ukrainian authorities territories in the eastern Ukraine. The day after tomorrow, we are convening the meeting of the Security Council on the situation in Ukraine. We do believe that the membership of the Security Council will express their concern on the non-implementation of the Minsk agreements, non-implementation of the commitments on the Russia side to respect the human rights both in Crimea and in the eastern part of Ukraine under control of the Russian proxies and those who arrive from Russia to destabilize the situation. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for
Thank you, Ambassador.
your presence here.
I'm delighted to introduce Ivana Bilic and Elena Sharvan, two of the key authors of the Human Rights Report on Crimea.
Thank you, Mary. I would like to welcome all dignitaries and organizations here to discuss with us the latest report, the Human Rights on Occupied Territory, Case of Crimea, Global Security and International Order, including the United Diplomatic Community, representatives from different countries, also members of the NGO community at the United Nations, many other national and international organizations. Before I start, I would like to thank everyone for coming today at this venue, as this emphasizes the grave threat the Russian occupation of Crimea makes to the human rights and international order embodied by the United Nations and the peace and prosperity that this order brings. Thank you to the esteemed authors for their outstanding work and dedication to human rights, international law and order, global peace and security. I would like to extend my sincere and deepest gratitude to a very special woman, Professor Mary Holland, who supervised the project and kindly agreed to moderate today. Thank you to David Glasgow, Assistant Director of the Public Interest Law Center, for his guidance and support for this pro bono project. I would like to thank Matthew Mosner and Ethan Berger for their time and valuable comments to the early drafts. Special thank you to all the editors, designers, volunteers, experts who gave us their feedback on the second edition. And thank you to the wonderful team from Bolia Institute for the superb work and dedication to the second edition of this report in making this a reality. Thank you to our Razom partners for their hard work, support, and understanding of the importance of the issues presented today. We gathered a year ago to discuss the legal dimensions of the Russian actions in Ukraine, the occupation of Crimea and its illegal attempts to annex Ukrainian territory. To this day, the Russian Federation continues to occupy sovereign Ukrainian territory in Crimea and has violated international law by illegally seizing the Ukrainian peninsula. We still have to sort out all the implications and grave consequences of the illegal actions of the Russian Federation in Ukraine and find a solution to restore Ukrainian sovereign territory for people of Ukraine and for us as the international community, individually and together. What is very clear today is that practice of human rights in occupied Crimea is dire and continues to deteriorate. Every day, Ukrainian citizens in occupied Crimea face unprecedented oppression and limitation of their rights, serious and consistent violations of the civil, political, social, and economic and cultural rights of Crimeans have been well documented by a variety of organizations, including the United Nations, Human Rights Watch, international media outlets, reports from the undercover journalists within Crimea, and various local organizations over the previous year. The illegitimate self-proclaimed Crimean and Russian authorities target those ethnic, religious, and national groups that oppose the occupation. Indigenous Crimean Tatars are frequently suspected of this sort of broadly defined as anti-Russian activity. To help address the situation, to build on those findings, and create a pragmatic guide for people both within Crimea and outside of the peninsula to understand the legal framework of the situation, and in an attempt to sort out the legal chaos that has been created by the illegal actions of the Russian Federation in Ukraine, an international team of lawyers based at New York University School of Law prepared this report as pro bono service. The purpose of the report is to assist individuals in Crimea, Ukraine, as well as around the world, working in academia, governments, international organizations, non-governmental organizations, business, and media, to understand the nature of the human rights violations in the occupied territory, so that they are better equipped to defend and protect the internationally recognized expression of human rights. The manual is designed to help residents of Crimea take steps to improve their current situation directly. The report or white paper, as it became known, includes 4 parts and the manual. We analyzed the human rights situation in occupied Crimea, placing it within the context of applicable international standards, treaties, conventions, authorities and entities responsible for protecting and providing human rights, specific abuses of human rights by self-proclaimed Crimean and Russian authorities, legal precedents that apply to the occupied territory and its legal regime. The authors examine the historical and legal context, define the primary rights that are being violated, give recommendations on what steps people in Crimea can take, and outline actions for organizations. In part 1, we brought together several related threads to create the context for the current situation, covering recent history from Crimea's transfer in 1954 to the so-called March 16, 2014 referendum to unify with the Russian Federation. The Russian Federation's use of force to occupy Crimea in 2014 and post-World War II international agreements and treaties on state sovereignty and territorial integrity. In part 7, we outlined and examined 21 distinct human rights that are provided for the international and domestic laws. We analyzed each right individually with respect to international, Ukrainian, and Russian law. The report focuses on civil and political rights, right to life, freedom from torture or any other inhuman treatment, access to justice, right to nationality, right to privacy, etc. Social and economic and cultural rights, such as right to own property, right to social security, right to an adequate standard of living, right to speak one's own language. In part 3, we discussed and suggested remedies for individuals whose human rights have been violated, suppressed, encroached, or otherwise denied. The general and specific remedies include the use of international, Ukrainian, and Russian Federation legal instruments. A crucial part of this report is the Human Rights Protection Guide, the manual. The people in Crimea are economically deprived and legally underserved, often knowing little about their rights and being unable to demand their application. Therefore, the aim of the manual is to provide Crimeans of all ethnic and religious backgrounds with access to justice by explaining their fundamental rights. The manual lists a number of fundamental rights that apply to Crimea, according to international human rights treaties, as well as pursuant to the articles of the Constitutions of Ukraine and the Constitution of Russian Federation. Once John Prendergast, a great human rights activist, said that the biggest roadblock to action on genocide and other human rights crimes is ignorance. Most people just don't know that such things are happening. And often, if they have a vague idea they are happening, there is a feeling that there is nothing that can be done to stop those crimes. And Franklin Roosevelt, another great and wise man, said, "We must remember that any oppression, any injustice, any hatred is a wedge designed to attack our civilization." Russia's actions are striking at the heart of international law and the principle of the United Nations that has helped to prevent war since the World War II. And if we allow ourselves to let it be, we run into much bigger risk. We encourage you today to utilize all your great expertise, venue, power, all means to find a meaningful solution to stop the wedge of oppression, injustice, hatred towards the people of Ukraine in occupied Crimea. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Olena, and my special gratitude for the Ukrainian permanent mission to the UN for organizing this event. And thank you all for coming today and sharing our interest in that subject. After our first report, Crisis in Ukraine, its legal dimensions, I had a feeling that it's only a beginning, and here we are discussing our second report. Based on the concluded analysis and research, we developed a broad set of recommendations how to secure, protect, and remedy human rights in Crimea, as well as prevent future violations. And I sincerely believe that our recommendations, together with the manual, will become effective tools for human rights protections in Crimea and not only there. We address our recommendations to the Ukrainian government, the international community, the civil society, and the Russian Federation. All our recommendations are built according to the internal logical scheme. For example, if we recommend the Ukrainian government to do something, we encourage international community to help and facilitate this action, civil society to encourage and demand the action, and with respect to the Russian Federation, we recommend them to refrain from disorderly and illegal actions. In case of some recommendation, there is a reverse order. For example, if you recommend the Russian Federation to disband the illegal so-called self-defense units, we recommend the same time international community, Ukrainian government, and civil society to demand this action, consistently demand this action, and monitor compliance with those obligations. In our report, we have more than 60 recommendations, 61 to be precise. But due to time limits, I won't be able to present you all of them now, but we encourage you to address our report and recommendation section. But here I would like to mention a few of them. For example, we recommend creation of special international tribunals. On the example of the special international tribunal in Lebanon. We recommend the Ukrainian government to initiate the creation of this kind of tribunal, special international tribunal, and ask the international community for help and cooperation in this subject. This tribunal can be created by the decision of UN Security Council or by the multilateral international agreement. The distinguishing feature of this special international tribunal would be that international judges will comprise this court, and then this tribunal, and they will apply Ukrainian domestic national law, which is more close to Ukrainian community and also people who will be prosecuted there. Besides that, we also recommend creation of a special data bank. This data bank will be dedicated to storing information and other data, for example, emails, property deeds, different documents, and other evidence which could be used in future. Also, we foresee that this data bank will have this special feature that it will have at least 3 stakeholders. For example, it will be maintained and administrated by the civil society organizations, monitored by the international community, for example, UN or even Council of Europe. But it should be mandated by the international government, so the information and the data stored there could be used in future legal proceedings. Also, we recommend securement of ongoing monitoring of human rights in Crimea. And this recommendation goes primarily to Ukrainian government, especially Ukrainian ombudsman, who not so long ago asked international organizations to come and monitor human rights in Crimea because her office is expelled from Crimea and her activity is up back there. Which is not true. She still can perform her functions and her office, her staff can do this. So we strongly recommend them to perform their duties and monitor human rights violations and human rights situation in Crimea and work with victims, especially. With that respect, we also recommend Ukrainian government to create a special hotline so people in Crimea could report human rights violations. During our research, I personally conducted an experiment. I called the governmental hotline and asked where can I report the crime committed against me in Crimea, which is not true, but it's I'm a scholar, so I can do this experiment. My call was recorded, and then I received a letter from the Ministry of Justice saying that there is no such possibility because Crimea is occupied, which is against the international rules and Ukrainian law on occupied territory. So, next recommendation will be creation of an ad hoc commodity and grocery market. This recommendation is especially important now when Crimea is in blockade. So people still need to have access to those basic needs and grocery and commodities. And we are happy and delighted that in Ukraine some civil society leaders, for example, Refactor Baru is also calling for creation of this ad hoc market. Besides that, we also recommend the Ukrainian government with the help and cooperation of the international community to ensure free, affordable, convenient, and secure travel between Crimea and Ukrainian mainland. So we can preserve this connection, especially family connections, family connections, and cultural connections. Also, we recommend to ensure Crimeans with the access to true and free information and communication. And the way to do this is ensure broadcasting, TV and radio broadcasting, and to ensure that people in Crimea have access to 3G technology, which will help them to have a free access to cell phones and free and affordable cell phones, and access to internet and independent social medias and other medias. With respect to international community, we would like to emphasize that the role of international community and each and every country is crucial in preserving human rights in Crimea and Ukraine at large. We strongly encourage the UN members to fully implement the General Assembly resolution on territorial integrity of Ukraine and convince local and international companies to refrain from conducting any business in Crimea and engaging in transactions with self-proclaimed Crimean authorities and or Russian Federation with respect to the Crimea. We still recommend continuous and persistent monitoring of human rights situation in Crimea. And last but not least, we also ask for extensive financial, technical, and intellectual help with respect to investigating and remedying human rights violations in Crimea. And as I mentioned, we have many other recommendations. Unfortunately, I am not able to discuss them now, but I hope and to elaborate those recommendations during our Q&A session. Thank you for this.
Thank you very much. So our next presentation is going to be remotely via Skype from Gabrielis Landsbergis, a member of the European Parliament from Lithuania.
Hi, good day, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me thank the organizers of the roundtable for the opportunity to participate in this event and express my views on Russia's role in current world affairs. I would also like to commend the authors and collaborators of the report. Huge work has been done in collecting and analyzing information on human rights abusers in Crimea. It is important that practical recommendations are given and that the findings are being presented to the international public. It is crucial that the violations and crimes in volatile eastern Ukraine and occupied Crimea are documented continuously. In this respect, the work of local and international NGOs and experts is essential and must be supported. There are a number of initiatives that strive for awareness raising of the systematic abuse of human rights and freedoms in Crimea, currently under the forced Russian rule. The world should know and be constantly reminded of them so that the case of the occupation and annexation of Crimea would not be easily put aside as a fait accompli. While the perpetrators should also have a less sleep, realizing that they cannot hide their crimes and that eventually they will face justice. However, in situations when a country doesn't have jurisdictions over a part of its territory and the occupying power is letting silence, torture, and harass, the ultimate responsibility to assert the international laws and norms lies with the rest of the international community. Russia, as it is today, is a result of a long-term development. The origins and nature of Putin's regime are described in an excellent analysis of Karen Davisha in her book, Putin's Kleptocracy. The problem is that Europe was not paying enough attention to that. Alert voices of countries that have a better understanding of going on in Russia were not listened to. The West was enjoying peaceful times. Some were even thinking that NATO has lost its role, others would justify a managed democracy, some sort of specific Russian path in Russia's special sphere of influence. Meanwhile, inside Russia, there were many troubling developments, such as increasing restrictions on freedom of speech, work of human rights organizations and NGOs, mysterious death of journalists, whistleblowers, and regime critics. Russia's neighbors, striving to modernize and free themselves from the Soviet past, have suffered from multiple trade and energy wars and continuous meddling in their sovereign affairs. Countries in Europe's east were the real Russia's first stare, hence the determination for Euro-Atlantic integration and support for the transatlantic link. Unfortunately, the EU strategy of maintaining good relations with Russia no matter what was in part encouraging Russia to go this path. Moscow tested grounds, not once but multiple times, and every time Europe would rush in with assurances and proposals of fresh and new cooperation frameworks. The most obvious example of this appeasement strategy is Europe's reaction to the Russian and Georgian war in 2008. Instead of putting sanctions in place, Europe proposed to start negotiations on a new partnership agreement. But this strategy of involvement and appeasement has failed. This approach has not prevented Russia from a war against Ukraine, has not stopped the revision of borders in Europe, and violation of a number of international agreements by Russia. The resolution on the state of EU-Russia relations adopted in the European Parliament in June this year clearly states that Russia has herself compromised the strategic partnership with the EU. For the EU, there cannot be business as usual with Russia until a real, qualitative change in the policy of Russia occurs. Russia has to start respecting her international obligations and stop aggressive and intrusive policies against her neighbors. The implementation of the Minsk Agreement is the litmus test and a prerequisite for restarting the dialogue. It's quite clear that Russia will not implement them by the end of this year, so the EU sanctions will be extended for yet another period. The only way to stop Russia from risky endeavors is to make clear that there will be a clear response and it will involve high costs for Russia. Policy and military planners in Moscow have to include that in their calculations. We should not be wasting time. First, we should be conscious about the strategic driver behind Russia's moves. It is to destroy a special link between the US and Europe. Russia wants to eliminate US presence in Europe and to revise the Europe security order, even though Russia clearly has no comparable military or economic power force to play. Moscow has developed a sophisticated and effective set of instruments to use and abuse the weaknesses of the West. Second, we must understand that the absence of activity and leadership of the democratic part of the world creates a vacuum. And wherever there is a power vacuum, Russia will come in and will pursue solely her own interests. Third, we should be conscious that while in our talks with Russia, we expect joint solutions, compromises, and real dialogue, Moscow uses it to simply lock and prolong conflict situations. Therefore, while looking for ways to deal with Russia, we also have to work towards strengthening the transatlantic link, ensure more presence of the US in Europe, also by consolidating trade relations between the two biggest world economies. We have to give support for Ukraine. In its fight for peace, democratization, and reform. The Ukrainian producers are looking for new markets as trade with the EU grows. In the backdrop of possible retaliation from Russia, it would be important to gain access to other big markets. We should also encourage military and economic cooperation among the countries in the region so that they would be stronger and supporting each other. Every debate with the Russian side should start from reminding the occupation of Crimea and the situation in Donbass. We are in fact dealing with an occupant and persistent violators of international law. Evidence of war crimes and human rights violations should be continued to be collected. The existing international judicial institutions should be used, and if necessary, new ones should be created for ensuring justice. I do not think there is anything that Europe or US can propose for Russia that would be attractive enough to Russia without compromising our own national security and interests. But despite that, there is a strong gravitation in the political and diplomatic circles to come back to making further agreements with Russia. That makes the Baltic countries feel quite uneasy. The West has been shamed for a long time that it exports democracy. Russia now exports nihilism, lawlessness, and human rights abuses. Can the international community trust Moscow as a partner? I think that those who are not succumbing to wishful thinking, those who are not listening to words, but analyzing actions, would that Russia has not done anything by now to restore this trust. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like next to move us to a pre-recorded statement by Anna Potiga, a member of the European Parliament and the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Poland.
On March 18th of 2014, the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, signed the act of annexation of the Ukrainian territory, peninsular territory of Crimea. And it started the enormous process of enormous atrocities for the local minorities of various types. Actually, Vladimir Putin, before annexation of Crimea, used to advocate the right to self-determination as stipulated within the final act of the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe. And his actions were contrary to this act. Before annexation of Crimea, the minorities living there enjoyed reasonable freedom of speech, possibility for education in their national languages. After first creeping of so-called green people, then official administration of Russian Federation, all these freedoms were carved until the beginning of 2015. All Ukrainian nationals, or actually all Ukrainian citizens living in Crimea, lost their right for free movement they enjoyed earlier, as they were forced to change their passport passports, and their Ukrainian passports were considered not valid. One of the most ancient ethnic community, Crimea Tatars, once more were undergoing the persecution with disappearances, forced expelling, for forced migration to the western parts of Ukraine. The leaders of this community, Mustafa Jamilev, the former Soviet dissident, as well as his deputy, the member of Ukrainian Verkhovna Rada, Mr. Chubarov, used to lead this community, asking them to stay and to defend their rights. Therefore, they were really persecuted in their place of living. And we have to remember that ethnic Tatars, well, were the subject of ethnic cleansing perpetrated by Stalin. They just started to come to Crimea after independence. What happened after March 18 of 2014 was quite contrary to what we think about the right to self-determination. When I listened in 2010 that the former president Yanukovych decided to prolong the lease of the Crimea base, Sevastopol base, to Russian Black Sea Fleet, I just considered it a very mistaken step and probable trouble for local Ukrainian community, meaning the possibility for ethnic Russian to come to creep actually to Crimea, then changing the ethnic balance of this territory. Now I think that we have to in respect of violation of many internationally acknowledged human rights documents, fundamental documents, a fact. And we have to repeat in forums like UN that this territory was taken illegally and it should be returned to Ukraine.
Next, we'd like to hear from Bogdan Yaremenko, who is chair of the board of the Ukrainian nonprofit Maidan of Foreign Affairs, and I believe a report was circulated.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I would like to express my appreciation for Ukrainian mission to UN, as well as to Border Institute and organization Razum for inviting us here, as well as to the Renaissance Foundation for supporting our trip to New York. Ladies and gentlemen, our NGO Maidan of Foreign Affairs, together with our partner web portal, the Black Sea News, represented here by my friend, its editor-in-chief, Mr. Andriy Klemenko, are not only covering the Russian military aggression in Ukraine since February 2014, but is the only Ukrainian institutions that so far summarize the picture of the process of annexation and published the strategy of returning the Crimea, which basically was represented last year. We are convinced that the situation in Crimea and eastern Ukraine is directly connected and should be kept in the same frame of political analysis. Honestly speaking, the picture will still be incomplete without analyzing the Russian intervention into Ukraine aside of what is happening in Transnistria in Moldova, Abkhazia and Ossetia in Georgia. The time limits will not allow me to do it in a proper way. Nevertheless, the issue of human rights in the conflict areas in Ukraine, and in particular in the annexed Crimea, cannot be properly addressed without broader overview of the political, military, security, economic and social situation. So we decided to share our responsibilities. With your permission, I will cover a more general issue in order to allow my dear friend and colleague Mr. Klemenko to concentrate fully on the human rights issues. So, political preferences of the inhabitants of Crimea were not the main reason for the annexation of Crimea. The local parliament elected in 2012 included the only 3 deputies out of 100 who represented the pro-Russian movements and organizations. A fear of ethnic and interreligious conflicts has been artificially enforced by the Russian propaganda within a short period of time as an active phase of the annexation plan was being implemented in winter 2014. This fear was an additional factor that reinforced the overall concerns of the citizens. The main propaganda messages directed towards the citizens of Ukraine from the Russian side covered the issues of the quality of life and quality of government. The media has created an illusion of greater efficiency of Russian authorities compared to Ukrainian ones, and of the readiness of the Russian state to ensure the better socio-economic life conditions without any efforts made by the Ukrainian citizens. So, the invasion scenario looks as the following. First, presence of the Russian citizens, including the military personnel from the intelligence agencies, primarily from the Principal Intelligence Directorate of the General Staff of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, together with the pro-Russian activists among the local residents and citizens of Ukraine. They organized rallies, fights, mass disturbances, and violent confrontations with patriotic pro-Ukrainian citizens. 2. A premeditated escalation used as an excuse for creation of the self-defense units that include both local residents and the Russian citizens infiltrated specifically for this purpose. 3. In the eastern Ukraine, these units seized administrative buildings and paralyzed an activity of the state bodies, which in turn stepped away from the solving problems and in some cases supported anti-state actions. In Crimea, the self-defense units were a cover-up of that was covering the covered actions of the special forces of the army of the Russian Federation. They were the ones who seized the government agencies and blocked military units of the Ukrainian army. 4. Establishments of the pseudo-government that took over the responsibility of the management of the occupied territories. The mentioned pseudo-governments imitated freedom of expression, which was used as the justification for explanation of the aggression. The inability or unwillingness of legitimate authorities of Ukraine to take measures for quick and decisive suppression of these trends, an attempt to calm down the protesters or aggressors were regarded as weaknesses, encouraged the aggressor, demoralized the Ukrainian supporters. Corruption, common business interests of the local and central authorities representatives of Ukraine with the relevant public and private bodies of the aggressor state were actively used as mechanisms of influencing and compromising the political will for resistance. The annexation of Crimea has become the first case of the invasion of the territory in Europe since the Second World War. The mentioned situation calls into question the existence of the or the effectiveness of the international law and the international security guarantees, thus threatening the existing world order. So let me speak a little bit about the current state of affairs in the eastern Ukraine and in Crimea. The hot phase of the armed conflict in the eastern Ukraine is still ongoing. However, the so-called Minsk agreement do not function as the ceasefire mechanism, at least as the effective ceasefire mechanism, do not lead to the establishment of the sustainable peace, and do not provide a solution of the problem of the territorial integrity restoration of Ukraine, because it doesn't cover Crimea. The escalation phases coincide with the international negotiations on peace settlement. They're effectively used by Russia as a tool to pressure on negotiating partners. The occupied areas of the Donetsk and Lugansk regions suffered from the large-scale destruction of the infrastructure and residential buildings resulting from the combat operations. An industrial infrastructure was particularly destroyed, plundered, and transported to Russia. In particular, defense enterprises were completely dismantled and transported to Russian Federation. The current condition of the industrial infrastructure does not allow to predict a possibility of the restoration of the pre-war regional economic structure and, consequently, the social structure of the population. About 2.5 million people, about one-third of the overall number of inhabitants, mainly the most educated and active part of the society, became forced migrants and refugees. Prospects for resolving the situation in the east of Ukraine, the problem of so-called specific areas of Donetsk and Lugansk regions, are uncertain. Forced migrants and political fugitives from Crimea, about 40,000 people, represented the most active and loyal citizens of Ukraine. In general, the public mood in Crimea can be described as follows. At the beginning of the Crimean occupation, the residents were fully satisfied with Ukrainian legal liberalism, not satisfied with the quality of life, not satisfied with the quality of government. As the result of occupation, as for now, the residents of Crimea have not received the improvement of the quality of government, it actually deteriorated, have not better quality of life, it actually deteriorated too, have lost Ukrainian legal liberalism. A phase of adaptation of the law of the occupying country in Crimea is over, and the process of reclamation of the assets of the annexed territory is ongoing. This process can be described as simply as colonization. Replacement or delusion of the Crimean population is taking place. The import of Russians, including the military personnel and their families, officers of the intelligence agencies and their families, officials and their family members, members of the Russian organized crime groups from the northern Caucasian region of Russia is still ongoing. Thus, according to the official Russian statistics, the increase of number of Russian immigrants in Sevastopol during the occupation was about 25,000 people, or about 7% of the population. In the rest of Crimea, this rate is somehow lower, 10,000 people, or 0.5% of the population. The occupying authorities are developing Crimea mainly as the military base. The number of troops is about 40,000 people, not including the members of the security agencies. The development process and increase of the military grouping has not yet been completed. However, according to the objectives defined by the Minister of Defense of Russia, the number of Russian troops in Crimea can be increased up to 120,000 people. The invaders turned the Crimea to a rehabilitation center for the militants fighting in the east of Ukraine. Training camps for training of the mercenaries, later directed to fight against the armed forces of Ukrainian Donetsk and Lugansk regions, have been established in Crimea. Crimea has become a basic center of support of the Russian military grouping in Syria as well. Forming a powerful military base in Crimea, Russia threatens both the southern regions of Ukraine and existing Black Sea naval communication, as well as the European countries' NATO member states, Bulgaria, Romania, and Turkey. The road infrastructure in the occupied territories has been fully and largely destroyed. During the period of Crimean occupation, the loading on road bed had been increased in tens of times, primarily owing of the movement of the large number of heavy military vehicles like battle tanks, armored vehicles, so on. All programs of the road construction of Russia in Crimea turned to be usual patching work of a very poor quality. The Crimean economic assets are being stolen or lost their capacity. Railways, ports are not actually used. Without proper irrigation, the agricultural soils lose their fertility, while their salinity is increased. Natural resources of Crimea are being destroyed. The unscrupulous extraction of the fresh underground water has led to the raise of the saline groundwater level in some areas, like in Kerch Peninsula, leading to the increase of the soil salinity. Furthermore, it complicates the water supply to the population. Given the intense military building, the occupants increase the volume of the quarry mines development and open up the new quarries for gravel extraction, which can result in destruction of the microclimate in the regions like the valleys or the Bakhchisarai area, Alma Valley. The situation with the quality of life in Crimea has developed in such a way that under systematic reduction of employment, according to our calculations, since the annexation, about 200,000 jobs, primarily in tourism, restaurant and hotel businesses, services, small businesses, and transport have been lost. Available vacancies are not filled. Today, there are 2,000 vacancies just in the municipal officials, among the municipal officials in Crimea, as well as a large number of jobs in healthcare. Generally, it is difficult to fill the vacancies of ordinary employees in the business structures as well. What will happen next? Developments in eastern Ukraine are hard to predict because the hot phase of the conflict is still ongoing. Russia, as the state aggressor, has sufficient resources to continue military actions. Its probable political purposes in Ukraine and in Europe have not been achieved yet. The means of influence on Russia, such as international sanctions, just begin to influence the Russian economy and the political will of the leadership of the Russian Federation to continue aggression. Nevertheless, but the duration in time is uncertain. In Crimea, the main trends affecting the current developments are as follows. First, the main priority is to develop a territory as the military base. Consequences: posing threat to security to the Black Sea region, the EU member states and NATO, Bulgaria, Romania, and Turkey, change of the military balance, namely within the framework of the Agreement on Conventional Armed Forces in Europe, and possibly within the framework of the agreements in the field of strategic nuclear weapons control, persistent military threat to the entire southern coast of Ukraine, with a purpose to implement the plan of setting up a land corridor between the Russian Federation, Crimea, and Transnistria, militarization of the region, expansion of the Russian military presence in Syria, and the consequent armed confrontation and civil war in that country. Further enforcement of the policy of forced loyalty towards the inhabitants of the Crimea, which will lead to the further violation of the human rights, the pressure on the dissidents, the disloyal groups of population, so-called disloyal, of course, strengthening control over the media. Implementation of strategic infrastructure building projects that reach across the fresh strait, the energy bridge. The need to increase supply of building materials and equipment, primarily the metal, timber, construction mixes, crushed stone, which will lead to increased pressure on the road infrastructure and increased use of local and natural resources, which in turn result in poor climatic balance in the number of sub-regions of Ukraine. Second tendency, lack of the economic development strategy, lack of the managerial human resources. Consequences. A trend towards reducing the number of small and medium-sized enterprises. The set priorities to develop and support the large companies, mainly in the defense sector. Unemployment growth, reduction of the tax capacity in the region, increase of the dependence of, on direct funding from the federal budget to Russia. I'm running out of time probably, so I will just name another trend is the continuation of the trend toward the resettlement of the citizens of simultaneous degradation of the democratic institutions, human rights and freedoms, increase of the corruption and criminalization of the daily life. And I believe there are the trends that we should keep in mind as the activities of Ukraine, which from our perspective is going to gradually expand the policy of peninsular blockade, trying to create enforcement mechanisms to engage Russia in the dialogue on the annexation. Thank you for your attention.
Our next speaker is Andrei Klimenko, Chief Editor of Black Sea News and the author of another report on Crimea. If I could ask our remaining two speakers to be concise, I want us to have time for discussion and questions to all our speakers.
Уважаемые коллеги, я хочу вначале попросить, чтобы вы нам с моим коллегой Богданом верили, несмотря на то, что многие из наших слова кажутся, еще покажутся вам излишне резкими.
Dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to ask you to believe what we are saying, me and my colleague Bogdan Yeremek, who just spoke. Please believe what we are saying, although some of our arguments and our statements will appear to be very stark and very blunt.
Дело в том, что у наших докладов по ситуации в Крыму есть сертификат качества, выданный Федеральной службой безопасности Российской Федерации.
So we have this copy of a certificate of the quality, certificate of quality given out by a Federal Security Service of Russia.
Это высшая оценка достоверности нашей информации, наших ведомств.
This is the highest appraisal of our of the truth of our statements.
Через 3 дня после того, как мы впервые в Вашингтоне представили свой первый крымский доклад, мы представили его 6 марта 2005 года, в отношении меня было возбуждено уголовное дело по возвращению.
After we presented our Crimea report, our own Crimea report in the March of this earlier this year, the criminal case was opened on me in Russia.
По этому делу уже допрошено более 10 моих ялтинских друзей и бывших сотрудников и проведено несколько обысков.
Based on this case, over a dozen of my colleagues, earlier colleagues in Yalta, have been questioned, and various searches have been done in various locations and private houses and so forth.
21 октября я представлял в Берлине апгрейд этого нашего доклада о правах человека в Крыму.
Recently, in November, I presented an upgrade of our report on Crimea in Berlin.
Через 3 дня после этого чуть не арестовали моего первого заместителя в Ялте по обвинению в создании агентурной сети.
About 3 days afterwards, my deputy my colleague in Yalta was almost arrested in Yalta with the charges of organizing a secret agent network.
И нам пришлось проводить экстренную операцию по ее вывозу из Крыма на территорию Украины.
And so we had to put together an operation to extract her from Crimea and bring her to Ukraine to escape persecution.
И, наконец, третье, это то, что Майдан закордонных справ — единственная организация в Украине, у которой есть постоянный крымский департамент из 3 крымских специалистов.
And the Maidan of Foreign Affairs is the only organization that has a permanent Crimean representation with the 3 specialists in Crimea.
Ситуацию с правами человека в Крыму нельзя рассматривать с количественной точки зрения. То есть, сколько убито, сколько похищено, сколько арестовано, сколько посажено в тюрьму.
So the human rights situation in Crimea cannot be viewed just from the point of view of quantity, in terms of how many were killed, how many were imprisoned, and so forth.
Я скажу несколько важных тезисов. Первое. Россия рассматривает Крым как военный трофей и распоряжается всем на территории Крыма и людьми, и имуществом как военным трофеем.
So a few of my main important theses are: first is that Russia views Crimea as a military trophy, and so it treats everybody, including people in Crimea, as a trophy.
Аннексия Крыма — это не результат никаких референдумов.
The annexation of Crimea is not a result of some kind of in quotes referenda.
Это результат военной спецоперации.
It's a result of a military special operation.
Ею руководил нынешний представитель Путина в так называемом Крымском федеральном округе адмирал Белавинцев.
So the chief commanding officer of that special operation was the current representative of Putin in so-called Crimean Federal Region, Admiral Belявintsev.
Это профессиональный военный разведчик, который в апреле прошлого года секретным указом Путина получил звание Героя России за аннексию Крыма.
He's a chief of intelligence officer, an officer of intelligence, and he received, after the Crimean annexation, he received the title of the Hero of the Russian Federation.
По поводу трофеев. Администрация президента Путина, правительство Медведева, Центральный банк России и многие министерства Российской Федерации сегодня пользуются краденым без всякого стыда.
So today, the administration of President Putin, the government of Medvedev, the Central Bank of Russia, and many ministries in Russia are using the stolen goods, the Crimean, without any shame.
Я имею в виду, что они официально приняли на свой баланс санатории, заповедники, государственные резиденции, винные заводы и так далее.
Meaning that they officially included in their sort of assets and budget all the sanatoria, all the wineries, all the other assets in Crimea, as if they were de facto theirs, de jure.
Действия в сфере гражданских прав населения – это действия оккупанта в отношении людей, захваченных в плен.
So these are all the actions should be treated as an actions of an occupant with regard to those they're occupying.
Мы в наших докладах и в новом докладе, который к концу дня сегодня будет опубликован на нашем сайте, вы прочтете десятки, многие десятки конкретных примеров.
By the end of today, a report, a translation of a report will be published on our website, an annual update on the situation in Crimea, and there will be specific examples, dozens of specific examples there.
Их объединяет главное. По отношению к людям, живущим в Крыму, Россия позволяет себе все, что угодно, даже то, что запрещено российскими законами.
The main conclusion is that in Crimea, Russia allows to treat the people even harsher, worse than people they treat people in Russia. They allow themselves things that they don't even allow themselves to do in Russia.
Как говорил Богдан Еременко, цель аннексии – это создание гигантской военной базы.
So as my colleague Bogdan Yeremenko said, the main purpose, one of the main purposes is to create a military base. That's why they annexed Crimea.
Поэтому поставлена цель убрать из Крыма всех нелояльных.
So the goal is to eliminate all disloyal people from Crimea as soon as possible.
Кроме того, нужно уменьшить население в целом, потому что сегодняшнего населения 2,4 миллиона человек для военной базы оно избыточно. Там как минимум миллион лишний.
Also, they would like to decrease the population because currently there is about 2.5 million people in Crimea, and that's just for a military-based type of situation is too much. So there's an extra million, so to speak.
И, наконец, нужно заменить как можно больше крымского населения населением российским.
And lastly, they want to switch the Crimean population and repopulate it with the Russian population.
Кто такие нелояльные? Это все журналисты, все гражданские активисты, все церкви, кроме Московского патриархата, и все крымские татары как народ.
So who are the disloyal, the primary disloyal people they consider disloyal? Is that all journalists, all civic activists, all Crimean Tatars as an ethnicity, and all the churches except for the Russian Orthodox Church.
Здесь коллеги говорили много правильных вещей о том, как с этим бороться.
My colleagues already mentioned many correct and appropriate things we can do to fight this situation.
Для меня самый сложный вопрос, как преодолеть главные проблемы на пути, в этой борьбе. Я сейчас скажу, какие.
So for me, the main consideration is how we can sort of address the most important questions in this struggle, and I will address them.
Первое. Россия нарушает сразу все права человека одновременно и демонстративно.
First is that Russia is violating all of the human rights simultaneously and demonstrating it to the world.
Это можно передать такой метафорой. Вы играете в баскетбол, а против вас играют в регби.
The metaphor for this is you're playing basketball and then the team that opposes you is playing rugby.
Третье. Никакие апелляции к международным судам не сработают, поскольку, как известно, Россия уже отменила юрисдикцию этих судов на своей территории.
No appeals to any international tribunals, courts will work because Russia pretty much canceled all jurisdiction of these courts on their territory.
И, наконец, Россия еще в марте этого года заявила официально, что права человека не относятся к ее базовым ценностям.
And in March of this year, Russia officially announced that the human rights is a concept that does not belong to traditional Russian values.
Мы должны, это сделал председатель Комитета Государственной Думы по иностранным делам господин Пушков в интервью в газете «Известия» 3 марта этого года.
This was the president of the Committee on Foreign Affairs of the State Duma made this announcement, Mr. Pushkov. He made this official announcement which was published in Izvestia, the newspaper.
Есть еще очень важный вывод. Аннексия Крыма – это точка, после которой Россия окончательно превратилась из авторитарной демократии в тоталитарное государство.
Another important consideration is that after the Crimean annexation, the Russian Federation pretty much turned from an authoritarian democracy or into a neo-totalitarian state.
При этом некоторые исследователи уже называют его идеологию российским нацизмом.
And some researchers actually call it's the ideology of the state Russian Nazism.
Как прекратить нарушение прав человека в Крыму?
How can you stop the human rights violations in Crimea?
Есть два пути.
Two ways to do that.
Первый путь – это деоккупация Крыма.
First is a deoccupation of Crimea.
Второй путь – это ужесточение санкций и создание единой международной коалиции, которая будет оказывать давление на Россию.
The second is to increase sanctions and to create a united international coalition that would increase pressure on Russia.
И в завершение.
In conclusion,
Крым сегодня, образно говоря, это стеклянная колба, из которой с каждым днем все меньше и меньше информации выходит наружу.
I can say that Russia today is kind of like a glass sphere, and less and less information comes out of that sphere with every passing day.
В то же время в эту колбу попадает извне только один сигнал. Это сигнал Киселев ТВ, Russia Today.
And the only signal going into the sphere is the signal from the Kiselev TV, the state, all the state information media.
Поэтому он и стал территорией страха и бесправия,
So it became
которой можно с людьми делать все, что угодно, и никто об этом не узнает.
So it became a territory of fear and lawlessness, and they can do with their people anything, and nobody will find out about it.
Спасибо.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now to our final speaker, Yuri who was illegally imprisoned in Russia in May 2014 and has become a speaker of Let My People Go.
Hello. My name is Yuri Yatsenko. I am a Ukrainian citizen who was illegally arrested and detained by the Russian Federation for over a year for political reasons. Others who have suffered and continue to suffer the same fate are Nadia Savchenko, Les Sentsov, and others of whom you probably have never heard. I was arrested in May 2014 in Kursk region of Russian Federation, to where I traveled together with my friend on a business trip. I was detained by the police during a routine document check that the Russian police often practices. At the police department, an agent of FSB, Russian Federal Security Service, showed to me a photograph of myself taken during the Euromaidan protests, which, as I suspect, he had found on social media. The agent demanded that me and my friend provide false testimony about being recruited by the head of the SBU, Security Service of Ukraine, to commit acts of terrorism in Russia. At the time, I was just an ordinary student from Western Ukraine, and I simply couldn't believe that such absurd accusations were being made against me. After we both refused to incriminate ourselves, They began beating us regular intervals. We were also offered an option of going on Russian TV channels and giving a predetermined speech about being sent to Russia from Ukraine to commit subversive acts, but instead turning to the FSB for protection to save us from the Ukrainian authorities and their persecution. Once again, we refused to give false testimony, so the harassment continued, turning into both physical and psychological violence. At first, the abuse and the beatings were constant. I remember one particularly brutal instance. Some special forces soldiers, wearing masks, put a bag over my head, took me into the woods, and tortured me. They hanged me by the handcuffs and for hours beat me in the head, groin, and other parts of the body, as well as strangled me. They also simulated execution, firing a gun next to my head. The next morning, which was 2 weeks since my arrest, I used a shaving blade to cut my abdomen and the veins on my arms to stop the abuse. Only then I was taken to the hospital, from where I finally managed to inform my family about my whereabouts. Despite the court decision about our deportation, both my friend and I were illegally kept at a special detention center for illegal immigrants for 3 months. During this period, the beatings and the torture was constant. Only 3 months later, my friend was released and taken to the Ukrainian border, while I was suddenly charged with the crime of possessing explosives. Through this year, in addition to all the other abuse I've mentioned, I had been regularly placed into the punishment cells and solitary confinement. The fact that I am free now is a testament to the efforts of the publicity campaigns, international pressure, and coordinated work of human rights advocates and lawyers. All public events in support of the prisoners are extremely important because they give a clear signal to the repressive regime that it is being watched closely and that none of the prisoners are forgotten. As of today, at least 15 Ukrainians are detained illegally somewhere in the Russian Federation, and at least 8 such prisoners are being held in occupied Crimea, both Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars. The criminal cases against them are fabricated. Most of them have been brutally tortured. These are people of various ages, professional backgrounds, and political views, but they share one thing. Their lives have become an instrument of the Russian state-sponsored propaganda that has created the image of Ukraine as a mortal enemy of Russia. I am appealing to you on behalf and campaign Let My People Go. There are no independent courts in Russia. That is why politically motivated cases have no chance of being decided fairly. Only international pressure can help achieve the release of those detainees. We are waiting for the return home of Nadia Savchenko, Alexander Kolchenko, Oleg Sentsov, Gennady Afanasyev, Alexei Chernil, Sergei Litvinov, Mykola Karpyuk, Stanislav Kliv, Alexander Kostenko, Kaiser Dzhemilov, Yuri Soloshenko, Valentin Vigivsky, and Viktor Shur. We also demand Crimea to deoccupy and that everyone be released from the places of detention. Artem Chinos, Ali Asanov, Mustafa Dehermanji, Yuri Ilchenko, Ruslav Zatulayev, Nuri Primov, Rustam Vaitov, Ferhat Saifullah. It is a miracle that I managed escape imprisonment. And I can tell you my story personally. I prayed for this all the time in prison. I know the hell those people are in. And I strongly believe that your role in their rescue is crucial. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'd now like to call on the distinguished delegate from the United States who's asked to make a comment, and then we'll have questions and answers. Is there a European Union member who would like to make a comment?
Yes, good afternoon, thank you very much. Well, not the US, right? To be clear, thank you, Chair, thank you for the opportunity. I think the report and certainly the enlightening statements by all the panelists provide a lot of food for thought and a great deal of analysis, and my colleagues will continue to view until the end of the seminar. But what I'd like to state clearly is the position of the European Union regarding Crimea. The EU has repeatedly voiced its deep concern over violations of human rights in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, following its illegal annexation by the Russian Federation. Such concerns have been underscored by the Foreign Affairs Council. This is the place where all the foreign ministers of the 28 European countries meet. It has been underscored in statements by the High Representative, Federica Mogherini, and most recently here in New York, to the support of our member states, to the joint statement delivered in October in the Third Committee by Ukraine on behalf of 35 countries. That statement recalled the reports from numerous sources that have set out wide-ranging concerns regarding the human rights situation. It also highlighted a range of human rights violations and called for measures to be taken to address abuses. In our own statement on human rights concerns at the third meeting, the European Union condemned continued human rights violations in the Crimean Peninsula, including strangling of civil society and media space, court cases in breach of elementary standards of justice, and the unprecedented level of intimidation of the Crimean Tatars and Ukrainian-speaking communities, which have followed its illegal annexation by the Russian Federation. Our statements on these concerns are in keeping with the wide-ranging response of the European Union to the illegal annexation of Crimea and our continued engagement to resolve the crisis in Ukraine by diplomatic means. I thank you for this opportunity. I wish good continuation of the works of the roundtable, which we will follow with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, the ambassador from Georgia, please.
I don't have a mic here, but I'll speak loud. First of all, thank you, and this is indeed a very good opportunity to yet again remind everyone that Crimea is a state which is not forgotten. Because, as was quite correctly mentioned, what happened in Georgia in 2008, and not quite an adequate reaction to that, resulted in what is happening in Crimea today, and not an adequate reaction to Crimea's issue is something that fuels now the conflict in eastern part of Ukraine, and this is a clear pattern. This is a clear pattern that one really has to see, because obviously there is always a shade to the truth, and one can assume that there is a Georgian truth versus the Russian truth, and there is the Ukrainian truth versus the Russian. We could have been wrong. Ukrainians are wrong. Baltic republics are wrong. And how come that everyone is wrong and only one country, one side, that is party to every conflict that is around its neighborhood and elsewhere is only the right? One really has to ask these questions. And to me, as a Georgian, unfortunately, what I'm hearing today here is a deja vu, because we lived through that. And we do not want the same thing indeed to happen elsewhere. I commend the report, which is a very good report. More of this indeed has to come. And I also want to corroborate what the gentleman was talking about, depopulation of Crimea. As a matter of fact, one of the occupied regions that we have in Georgia is almost depopulated. Actually, both are, but one particularly, because there is a major military base, and only 10 to 15,000 remain there to support the military base, while in pre-conflict there were about 120,000 people altogether living in that area. Therefore, most of the things that was mentioned here, I can again corroborate that these are exactly the same things that happened in my country and are continuing to happen. Abolition of the right of the people to study their own language. Georgian schools are being closed. People do not have the possibility to travel freely, to get the proper medical care, and most importantly, there is no presence of international organizations and human rights watchdogs. The same thing is happening in Ukraine. We do not have that information. We do not have information. There is no one who can actually monitor the process. The only monitoring mechanism that we have is the presence of the European Union monitors along the occupation lines, for which we're indeed very grateful, because this is the only monitoring mechanism plus the only security mechanism that we have. Again, I want to express yet again our very strong support to our brotherly Ukraine for its territorial integrity, and call again on the international community that we indeed need to be resolute, as the colleague from Lithuania, member of the European Parliament, was talking in his address, and I fully subscribe to everything that has said. Thank you again for this opportunity. We have more detailed information on what is happening, and I want to wish you successful continuation.
I'd now like to call on the distinguished delegate of Lithuania.
Good morning. Good morning. Well, let me introduce myself. Davis Gulbis, I'm political coordinator of Lithuanian Security Council team. I'd like to congratulate Walina and Ambassador and speakers for an excellent event. I have first-hand experience as a junior officer of policy. I was working in Crimea 20 years ago. My task was to integrate Crimean Tatars to help draft the Crimean Autonomous Republic Constitution and to follow propaganda at the time that was leaked from Moscow by Moscow Mayor Bushkov, reporter, as you will see. I never dreamt that in the council, when we were elected in 2015, I will be dealing with Crimea. My first major task was to include Crimea as an agenda item for the Security Council. So I negotiated for quite some time in order to do this. So this is my personal experience. As to what Rita's told, I completely agree with that. Except that I will not dwell on what happened in the past. I will illuminate about what needs to be done. First of all, I detect four major policies that work at this time. One of them is non-recognition of annexation. There's a GA resolution on the World Integrity of Ukraine that Ukraine and Lithuania and a number of other countries on top of the General Assembly. We need to continue to remind everybody this resolution and UN agencies, other agencies have to respect this resolution. There are many cases where simply some of the organizations and some of the countries simply ignore the resolution. And you as a civil society and we as governments have to ask to remind of that. Secondly, sanctions, and the EU had a legal issue where it spoke about new sanctions, but that we need to maintain unity and maintain economic sanctions on Russia regarding policies towards Ukraine and Crimea. The third major pillar is political pressure regarding human rights. As a council member, we continuously get raising this issue in the council. It's very difficult task because everyone knows that one council members is getting one conflict. We continue to raise that, and we believe Ukraine will continue to do that when it's on the council. The members will continue to support that. But we need you, we need civil society, we need Ukrainians, we need everybody else. Tell the council members it's an important issue, and this particular seminar plays an important role because that's the pressure on security council members and on human rights council to deal with it. So you play an important part. Send reports, council members, certainly as wide as possible. Get journalists to write about that. That creates pressure in the council. And the third and fourth pillar, which I believe is rather deep, this is communication strategy. I have a lot of friends in Crimea. I speak to them, and as one of the leaders told, they live in a glass bubble. Indeed, they live in a glass bubble. When I ask them, how do you perceive events? They tell me these are Ukrainian questions. How do you know? Just because I see that on TV, they don't have any other information channel. 2.4 million people just watch one TV, one propaganda TV. They don't have access. They have sporadic access to internet, but basically it's Russian website. So there's a lack of communication strategy addressed towards Crimea, and that's one of the weaknesses we have to remedy. We do that through the council because we expect that other people will be forming council activities at the same time to Geneva, but there's a wider need for communication strategy, much strong communication strategy. As to the future, what I see is of great importance is to support human rights office. Prince Zaid, as a High Commission, does a great job. There has been a report released yesterday on human rights situation. We need to support the office. We need to continue to press Russia to cooperate with them and to allow them access to Crimea. We have to support OSCE and High Representative of National Minorities in order for King to have access to Ukraine. We have to work with Council of Europe and their representatives in order to have access to Ukraine. That's one thing. The second is monitoring and implementation. There are a number of organizations we have invited on the council to do monitoring, but what's lacking is implementation. Yes, we get a report, but we need to get serious about implementing that, and this falls on the governments. So that's another message that we have to take from the center. What else? Yeah, that's good. That's it. Thank you.
Are there any other representatives of government who'd like to make a comment? All right, then let's open it. Oh, yes, Germany. Good to see you, gentlemen.
Yes, good morning, everybody. My name is Diana Huttmann. I'm counselor in the political department of the German mission to BGN, responsible for human rights. First of all, I would like to thank Ambassador Sergeyev and the whole panel for this very interesting discussion and the presentation of your findings and your reports. Especially, also, I would express my gratitude to Yuria Tsenko for being here and sharing your really horrible fate with us, and your appeal to us also to engage and to ask for the release of other prisoners is certainly a call which people keep in mind in order to act and continue to act. As to the report, I would like to thank you very much for this compilation and the thorough analysis. We will definitely look very detailed also, especially into the recommendations, which are very practical and concrete. And as Lithuania already said, this is what is also needed. It's also implementation. Monitoring is very important, especially given the fact that there is no access to Crimea allowed by the de facto authorities. The fact that we withdraw very much so. Continued monitoring by many sources and different sources is essential. Despite this difficult access, the bottom line of all the reports, and as you hear, that it's very clear, human rights violations in Crimea have increased considerably since the illegal annexation by the Russian Federation. And in that respect, I would very like to highlight also the high value we attach to the reports by the OHCHR. We, in that respect, I also would like to echo what the previous speaker from Crimea said, that we have to support the office and the work of the OHCHR further so that they continue with this important contribution. And in that respect, I would also like to remind us of the report issued by ODIHR, on the situation in Crimea, which was also released not long ago and comes to the same conclusion. For Germany, the worsening human rights situation in Crimea is a deep concern. We have stated our clear position in that respect in numerous EU statements. That was also mentioned by the head of the European delegation, and we have also done it nationally. We will continue to press for addressing the human rights violations in Crimea, and this is also why we supported, as many other countries did, the statement in the third committee that was delivered by Ukraine last month. This was the first time that a committee, such a statement was made in the GA committee. The statement was a clear message to the wider UN audience and other member states that we will not look away when human rights are being violated in Crimea. Let me finish by a question. I would be interested in hearing how do you distribute your manual in Crimea, and have you had any reactions from Crimean citizens onto your work? So how do you plan your follow-up on this? Thank you very much once again for the presentation.
Thank you, Germany. Thank you, Lithuania. Thank you, EU. Thank you, United States. Georgia. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, and first of all, Ukraine for helping us, World Institute and Razum to organize this event. This is the second edition of the report. The first edition, the first report came out at the very beginning of June, and we went to Brussels and Strasbourg and Ukraine to meet with Crimeans, with the European community and European Parliament. And this is how the idea of this much broader dialogue came up, and we realized that the differences are not really so subtle, and we pretty much are telling the EU, Ukraine, and the North America is working on the same things and telling the same things. The delivery might be different, but the idea is very much, and the principles are the same, and that's why we so grateful that Anna Papega and Mr. Landsbergers would participate in this panel. We met with different, that's why with recommendations we tried, this is our second report. In the first report, we took into considerations all the critique from the previous year, last year. And this year we tried to make our recommendations as concrete as possible. And we would like to develop them. We think we have a very good idea how to develop them, how to distribute the report. We are looking for new partners, EU NGOs and Ukrainian NGOs. We do believe that only coming together with different organizations, different partners, and working together, whether monitoring, auditing, or providing financial support, and making it as transparent as possible, and making the emphasis on the human rights, we can achieve success. We had we talked to the Ukrainian government and we offered them, because the manual is a concrete guide, and it's been translated into Ukrainian, Crimean Tatar, and Russian language. So the idea was that it can be distributed once people travel from Crimea to Ukraine. Obviously, we didn't want to the other way around, because we didn't want to get people in trouble. But as a state, Ukraine has a duty to inform its citizens, and Crimeans, they remain Ukrainian citizens, about their rights. And again, the chaos, legal chaos that has been created has to be sorted out for them. Maybe, so the first step we believe is in education and telling them, encouraging them at least to monitor, to report this or read about their rights and think about this. And that's why we would love you, again, we're looking for the partners. I think I spoke with Ukrainian colleagues, with EU colleagues about creating, developing, project by project, some, maybe some initiatives and working on distribution of this. We do believe that the Ukrainian state is overwhelmed and having too much on its plate. It's a young democracy. It needs our help. We witnessed with the Maidan that the barriers are all there, and they need our help, and we are ready to provide that help. And if Germany, in particular, is interested in distributing and helping us out, we will be only happy to have you on board. And we know how human rights are important for Germany in particular and other EU states. So that's pretty much, we also would like to emphasize, as Elena already talked about, recommendations about creating the international tribunals. Again, the Ukrainian judicial system is not there yet. It has all the potential, but by creating the tribunals for adjudicating the human rights violations that happen in Crimea, and we definitely envision adjudicating human rights abuses that happened at Maidan and then moving to the eastern Ukraine. It would help not only bring the justice to the people of Ukraine, but also it's a teaching moment, and having the international judges, experts on the board and using Ukrainian laws, because they're not as bad as we always hear. They're very good. As a lawyer, I can attest to that. It's my master's thesis, part of my master's thesis. But to work on creating, and because the Ukrainian society needs to move law and bringing justice by one, like in Yuri's case, by helping each individuals, you're gonna see how the system is gonna shape up. It's very important to create a database bank where people can, they know that someone cares about them, that they can store the information that is important for them. And we, being in Strasbourg, we found out that something similar exists like that about Chechnya. So I think the instruments are all there. We're ready to help out. It's one of our main recommendations. And obviously, there are many security measures, but we do encourage creating the ad hoc market so people from Crimea and from mainland can travel back and forth to stimulate, decrease the propaganda influence. We definitely would love to have a next step and distribute the manual, work on the recommendations, work on other reports, and we're looking for partners and just for your support in all this. Thank you.
Yes, please. We have a question.
I have close relatives in Crimea. I miss visiting them. I was in Crimea 2 years ago. I just want to express my appreciation to all involved, for all the work, for all the hard work you're doing to help Crimea. Russian occupation is never acceptable. Crimea belongs to Ukraine. And everybody wants freedom. It's not acceptable. And thank you for all your efforts.
Thank you. Other questions for any of the speakers? No other comments? All right, if that's the case, then thank you all very much for your kind attention and thank you for your support.